Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of the RK Leadership Podcast, where we help empower tomorrow's leaders through sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. My name is Rob Cameronpour, and my guest today is Nihanth Badugu, who is a Director of Program Management at Astrotech Corp in Houston, Texas. Nihanth, welcome to the RK Leadership Podcast, and I greatly appreciate your time today. And why don't you go ahead, please, and introduce yourself and kind of walk us through your journey for the folks.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I just want to make a correction. That was Austin, Texas, and not Houston.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And so I am Nihanth Badugu. Right now, I'm working as the Director of Program Management for Astrotech. And basically, Astrotech, we are coming from the world of space and NASA. Our CEO, we had a contract with NASA where we provided them with the mass spectrometer for checking air pollution and also doing any of the rock or soil sampling up in the International Space Center. We're pivoting towards new emerging markets with the mass spectrometer that we have. But going back to my journey, I'm from Toronto. That's where we met Rob, and my bachelor's is in chemistry from York University. I started working as a chemist in a lab in Toronto, and then I really wanted to pivot towards leadership and program management, and I completed my PMP in 2013. And along the journey, I've had some great leaders who have given me a chance to work as program manager, and I pivoted towards consulting after that. And last 3 years, I've been in Texas. I moved here during pandemic, working for a biotech firm and solving the COVID diagnostic kit issues that we had back then.
Nice.
And now I've moved on to working for Astrotech.
Awesome. So what's your experience been like working in Toronto and Canada versus now in the States? How has that changed for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like working in Canada for sure has given me all the right exposure in terms of getting the technicalities and getting used to the industry. Consulting had a lot of big factor for working there, and that's when I actually had an exposure working in States as well. The one difference that I can point out is the scale of US and the kind of impact that you can make with the opportunities you get in US is far larger than Canada in my experience. But the cultures are also very different in terms of the work pace that goes in US compared to Canada. And those are the two things I feel like I've really experienced the difference between two.
So which place has the faster pace?
US for sure.
So there's a lot of young folks now who have graduated, and it might be tough to find jobs in their market within Canada at least, or the region that they're at. And I understand there is plenty of opportunities in the States for certain industries. How easy is it for somebody that's a graduate of a Canadian university to want to now cross borders and work in the States?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Rob. And I've on LinkedIn as well, I get reached out a lot about this question. And it really boils down to like what industry you are in. It gets easier or harder for you. For example, semiconductor in US is or engineering in general is like very lucrative, they need more workforce. So that gets easier in that direction. But it would be harder for someone in the liberal arts or studies, let's say, right? But the process is pretty generic in terms of you get a offer letter with an US company, then you go to get either a TN or H-1B visa, and then under TN visa, you would have certain categories that you can get to US for. So you really have to be within those categories, and you should be aiming for those jobs.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I'll get you to share your information at the end of the podcast. So whoever that has any questions for you can feel free to reach out if you like, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
But thank you for sharing that information. So, as we talk about leadership in various aspects of it, what do you believe are the key qualities that make a great leader?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the great leaders always have a clear vision. It always starts with like having that vision which you can communicate effectively with your team. Second comes like you have to have the accountability. I feel like I've worked for a lot of great leaders, and in my own leadership positions, if you are not accountable for the vision that you're setting, the work you're doing, and how you conduct yourself among your team, you really lose that credibility, I feel. And the last but not least is like having that understanding of being adaptable. Like we live in a dynamic world and things change very quickly. So in order to like make that shift, you have to able to communicate your vision, but also be willing to change it when the markets are changing. So I think like those three, like having a clear vision, having complete accountability, and being dynamic to understand how the markets are changing.
Awesome. Now, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into those, Nihanth. When we talk about clear vision, it's a word that gets thrown around quite a bit in leadership context. Can you, from your perspective, what does having a clear vision mean, and why is it required for you to do so as a leader?
That's a great question, and I know that's one of the leadership, like the words that have been thrown around, and I think it takes a lot in having a clear vision. It depends on what industry you are in, and it really depends on like how much work that has gone behind doing the customer research, having the voice of customer, and understanding what your organization or what your company's position is within the industry right now. So it boils down to like having a lot of understanding where do you stand clearly in the market. And then once you have that understanding, it's about like, how do you effectively communicate then, right? So I find a lot of times like you can be working for this great product, but it's not a really market fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can have a great product, but if your customers don't want it, then it's just a great product that doesn't never take off. So I think doing that background work and understanding the market helps you to, position yourself with the clear vision that you're setting up. And that's what I've seen, like with the difference between good and bad leaders. What do you think? How does one communicate or come up with a good vision?
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to really understanding the market for sure, your customers, which industry you play a key in. For me, having that vision is also being able to close my eyes and see a little bit down in the future. It's where do we want to go? How do we get there? And developing those strategies and like creating a roadmap in terms of how do we get from like A to B to C to D, etc. So you don't want to look too far down the road, but you do have to have, again, a strategy or a plan in terms of where you're heading to. And, executing that plan is also vital to just not putting, words on paper.
Yeah, buzzwords.
Beautiful strategy together where, and I've seen quite a bit of that people are great at writing strategy, but they fail miserably in terms of the execution aspect of it.
I agree 100%.
Awesome. So we talked about the leadership aspect in general. Now let's break it down in the context of program management that you're in. What do you think are key qualities to make a great leader as a program manager?
Yeah, so program management is very interesting. Like you will build these great teams and we will all be working on that vision or a product, but oftentimes no one directly reports to you. So it's one of the skill that really a successful program manager needs is having an indirect influence. And that could be tricky on how you build that rapport and have that indirect influence. The second is having that vision that we just talked about and being very dynamic on how things change. And the last would be like making sure you take responsibility of the program. You cannot pass it on to like, oh, engineering failed, or like, the design, marketing. You are driving the ship, and you have to make sure that you take full responsibility of every failure that is out there.
Awesome. So you use a good word, indirect influence. How do you influence people indirectly?
Yeah, that is much tricky. I think it doesn't happen on day one. It's something like, it's like a sport. You have to practice it. You have to be, first of all, I feel like you have to be very open of who you are. You have to be honest. You build a rapport on various different things like family, sports, travel. And once you do that, then they will also assess you. They will check you for first few months, right? In terms of like, are you the person who is walking the walk and, just not doing the talk. So I think it's about A, showing credibility. B, it would be more about like actually being open and not trying to be closed off. So you are not a secretive person who doesn't give up your personal life. I think that really helps. And over the period of time, there will be situations where these aspects will be tested, and I think that's when it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
That's right. So Nihanth, let's go back to your journey and the start of your leadership. Now, what made you want to get into a leadership position or role? What interests you about leadership? And when you were getting into leadership, what helped you in the sense of, I know in a lot of organizations, they don't provide training prior to you getting into the role, and it's all while you're in the role you're learning and getting coaching or whatnot, or and that's how some people kind of struggle through it. How was the journey for you, and kind of like what made you get into leadership? What inspired you to get into leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. Given my background in like technical and having chemistry, and I was working in a pharmaceutical, I almost thought like I will not break into leadership roles. And nothing wrong about being a chemist and working in a lab, but I just kind of felt like I was limiting myself, and I probably needed more options. And that's when I started looking into project management, which is a PMP certification, which I really help and mentor people getting into that. And that just gave me a segue of understanding businesses and how they operate, what is a financial statement, what are some of the risks, and just like having that technicality of what a successful business runs like. And also preparing for that certification, I rubbed shoulders with some of the leaders who were actually pursuing that. I got it from U of T. So I think on my journey, PMP had such a good source of like, I believe in myself that I could get this done. And also having a strong network and people trying to give me an opportunity at that point really helped me to get into a leadership position that I am in right now.
Awesome. No, that's great. And I always tell people, and I advise people that, project management, the one thing project management really teaches you is communication skills. You got to have like great communication skills, especially listening, because you're now dealing with various stakeholders and people wanting different things.
Yeah.
And there's timelines and schedules, and there's so many aspects to a project, and you have to make sure everyone's kind of aligned, even with respect to the scope. So I think that's great that I'm sure that project management, the PMP, helped you quite a bit. So now throughout your career, you have various leaders or managers that you've kind of dealt with. Can you talk about your experience with what was the best thing you learned from one of those leaders, and what was something that wasn't so positive that you said, hey, if I ever become a leader, this is who I'm not going to be like?
Right. So looking back, I've had some great leaders who have guided me throughout my career, and one stands out. Marvin, he was the leader. I was working at Airco as a project manager there, and it's really about like, as I was saying earlier, when when you're a leader and things go south, you have to take full accountability. And we were working on a project, and there was a leak of HCl in a reactor tank. And instead of blaming it on the workers who were there on the factory, and we were like miles away, he really stood up and put his hand up, and he was instrumental in saying that the failure is totally him. It was not his team. He did not plan it through. And I thought it was incredible for someone to take the blame where he was so miles away from the factory, and I didn't get the full context. And then months later, there was, we were able to execute that project successfully. And when we were getting the recognition, he would say that it was not me, it was the team who actually was successful. So I think that was very incredible and stood out, that when it was failures, he would shield his team. And when it was success, he would kind of distribute it among the team. So that had a really lasting impression on me. And then for some leaders that I would not want to have the quality is, I think, we've all been in business. There has been layoffs and there will be changes. Sometimes, the hard things happen. And that is fine. I think everyone understands, whoever plays in the business world. But having that empathy and how you go about it, even if you have to deliver a bad news to someone, is something that I have seen a lot of leaders not do it well. They would just cover for themselves and not, even how they deliver the message is very rude in some sense. And that's something I have taken a notice of, like being in a leadership position, to always exercise empathy towards my team and everyone who shows up to play that business game.
That's right. So you're in this. How many people do you have within your organization?
Currently, it's very startup culture, where we have trying to transition from Houston to Austin. So I would say about roughly 50 to 60, and then we hire external consultants for our engineering needs as well.
Okay, awesome. So the other aspect of an organization, and in my opinion, which aligns with leadership, is a company culture. Now, what are your thoughts on the importance of company culture? What does it mean to you, and how does an organization ensure that their culture is aligned with their leaders?
Yeah, excellent question. Company culture is very important for an individual to be successful. And I often go back to having, we should exercise diversity in every possible way. And that is not limited to just our race and profiles, but also intellectual diversity, I feel, where everyone thinks different and everyone's opinion matters. And it takes 4 people to become a genius, right? So I think that is always something I've seen a difference between corporations, where someone shut down depending on what their position is not a good culture that you want to be part of. So I think and that happens within the teams as well, right? So it's a corporation is just like a segment of small teams all coming together. You can have a great, let's say, IT or HR team, but a really bad technical engineers team, and that can also happen within a good corporation. So I feel like it can happen in different departments, but I'm really big on like having that intellectual diversity, and everyone gets to speak their own thoughts and ideas freely without being afraid of if it's going to offend anyone.
Awesome. So now that you've experienced again both sides of the borders, and you've worked for like Canadian organizations versus US organizations, which side would you think is stronger from a culture perspective, that organizations that actually live their values versus just a writing on a wall?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, Rob, but I would not pigeon myself in saying like Canada versus US. Again, corporations are corporations across, and I feel once again it drives from the leadership. I've seen bad corporate culture in US in some companies, and great as well. So I wouldn't pick a side on this one, But again, it depends on the leaders, like how they communicate. And if you're asking about sheer pace, I feel like US has that sheer pace where things have to be delivered in very quick sense. So the culture is more like you gotta get stuff done. Where Canada, I mean, it seems like yes, we have that pace, but it's more about like, we are having our long weekends, we are enjoying our time, and the only thing difference I feel is like the sense of urgency for the firms that have worked in Canada versus US is completely different.
And that's a great answer, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how a leader would answer that question. It's not about taking sides. It's about actually, again, the leadership of the corporations. And that goes anywhere around the world for that matter, right? So great answer there. I want to take you back to your consulting days. Now, I want you to differentiate between, this is something I experienced myself, between the consulting world and the ordinary kind of corporations, and somewhere I guess where you are now versus the
Right.
consulting world. So how does that differentiate, and what do you see the difference between the two kind of structures?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, consulting was like, I'll tell you a story. When I was in consulting, I worked with this manager in Saskatchewan, and he was a very blue collar manager working there for almost 15 years. And then he had aspirations to move up in his role. But until like we engaged in a consulting gig, and then we were bringing in all these new processes and changes, he really took up on that. And then I worked really close in making sure that he delivers. And he was very engaged. He wanted to make a move, but he did not know if he had options. Long story short, after 9 months, he was so in like all these process changes and change management that we're bringing, he was able to pivot from working on the factory floor into business transformation, which was his true calling, he calls it now. And then fast forward a few years later, he's a director of business transformation, and we still keep in touch, and he's doing great in his profession. So I think consulting really helps me to like enable people's potential where they did not see it was there in the first place. So that was very rewarding working with consulting. Like you meet so many various people and different skill set, different way of thinking, depending on location, industry that you are in. Whereas the industry that I'm working, or the normal jobs where you go in, it's like you choose that industry for a reason. And then that industry will have certain culture, certain pace to it. So you have to adapt, rather than in consulting, you can explore with the client and see what the future possibilities could be.
That's good. And one of the things that I've heard in the past, so this was actually an interesting quote that I heard. Someone once said, and I believe I'm not gonna quote this per se, but I thought it was Robert Herjavec. He said that if consultants were so good at helping these organizations and helping them grow, etc., whatever they do for them, why don't they open their own corporation? Like, why don't they open their own company that does what they're helping with? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, correct. I mean, the one backlash that consulting gets is like, if you have to describe the job of a consultant, then he's someone who shows the time on your own watch, right? So the biggest challenge between any corporation is like they get too involved in how they've been operating. I'm sure you've experienced this. I've been doing this job for 10 years. You're going to tell me how to do it differently.
Yes.
So I think you get pigeonholed in terms of like how you are operating. Then you create that culture, and you're like too into it to see anything else. So that's why I feel consulting can come in and bring that fresh perspective. And one of the criticism for consultants is like, all these changes and processes do not stick. It was just the flavor of the month. We've only done it for a few months, and once you're gone, it and that's one of the biggest drawbacks. And I agree with it to some extent. But that's when you really have to, like, a good consultant will make sure that you install the processes or the changes that stick, and people really adapt. And then this circles back to what we were talking earlier, indirect influence. They have to buy in. I think people will not adapt a process if they do not like you. It's like the sales, right? You do not buy the product, you buy from people, sort of a thing. Um, so yeah, to answer your question, I think it's very important that the processes that you're installing are sustainable, and you have to work with the client to make sure that that is the case.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the other important thing, Nihanth, is, as you're aware of this as well as we've dealt with in the past, you also need buy-in from the leadership level, because once you instill those processes, it's the job of the leaders to sustain that
Correct.
and try to encourage their teams to use it. So I think that's huge too. It's got to be a whole buy-in from everyone.
100%. Yeah, I've seen a lot of times, like, you get into a consulting gig, the leadership are bought in, but then they're not adaptable, right? They ask their teams to adapt, but then they're like, oh, well, this is not how it's supposed to be. Like, I'm changing my ways as well. So you're absolutely right about that.
Now, sticking to that, and I know you've experienced this in consulting, when you go out and you're trying to help a company out, you're now dealing with some grassroots level employees as well to get information from them, talk to them about processes and whatnot, and kind of propose certain processes to them. How do you deal with difficult employees and teams per se that don't want to buy into your process, and what do you do to get them to buy in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something we've, in our past lives, we run that together when you were managing at Hydro One. And I think one of the key thing is that, when you look at the team as a whole, there are alliances that you have to make. Like when you show up the first day, not everyone's going to be your friend. They will look at you funny. They're like, why do we need these guys? So you really have to earn the credibility in earning that alliances. It could be a finance guy, it could be a technical person who understands the world you're coming in. This goes back to like building the rapport. And then dealing with a difficult person who's not adapting, you really want to understand what is his angle, or what is his logic, or what is his drawbacks for not buying in. And oftentimes it is like, I've been doing this 10 years, and are you going to tell me how to do this better? He's not ready for a change, or he doesn't see the full picture. No one is supporting him, or he doesn't have enough time to implement these processes. It could be various in combination of these things. So it's really like, as a job of a consultant, to understand what is his pain points and how can I make this better, right? So
That's right.
Obviously, then you build on like a fruitful dialogue, you find that rapport, but it usually comes down to that.
Yeah, and again, working with yourself, I think you did a fantastic job in that, where it wasn't just buying into the process. You buy into the individual that's helping you put that process together. So I think that's important, and it all goes back to building those strong relationships with people to gain their trust, right? It's all about having trust between the people that you're dealing with. So that's
100%. And I want to tell you, you were a great leader working at Lisa, and that was one difficult crew when we were working together. So we've had these challenges together, and I was very impressed with your leadership at that point. And that's the alliances that we formed, right? Like, how can we make this place better? So
absolutely. Yeah. No, thank you. I greatly appreciate that. It's tough. It's definitely tough, and it goes back exactly to what you mentioned. What I would hear from my team is, you've got this consultant that's never been in utilities. Really, they haven't worked, individually in utilities, and they're coming to tell us how to do our job. At the same time, it's very, I get the point from a consulting perspective, because you're now identifying blind spots that an organization can't see, or a department. And it goes back to even, individuals, us as individuals, even leaders, whatever you want to call it. we have blind spots that we can't see.
Right.
And this is where coaching, this is where feedback and all of that comes in to identify your blind spots. And you have to be open to it, because if you're not open to that feedback, you're always going to have this ego that, oh, whatever we're doing is good. No, I disagree with that. And
Right.
There's always that phrase that if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
My philosophy is actually break it,
Yeah.
and do it better.
100%. Yeah.
So there's always a better way of doing it.
Exactly. It's always like, I draw a lot of synergies between like a sports team and business team as well. You could be a superstar like LeBron James, but you need to know how to play well with the team.
Yes.
And you need to, have that game plan for the organization and not just for your points, right? So that's how businesses work as well, in my opinion. There are a lot of synergies. You will have the superstar on your team. You want to make sure that he gets his dues, credibility, and all of that. But you also want to make sure that as an organization, you are successful, right? So that takes, bringing it all together and coaching and looking at the blind spots that you're mentioning.
Awesome. So I want to dive into, something that irks me at times is with respect to people's backgrounds. And, you've got a chemistry background. And again, in this consulting world, you're coming in as somebody in the electrical world.
Right.
And I've heard this many, many times that, you've got to be an electrical engineer to even lead the people there, et cetera, which I don't personally believe in. I think leadership skills are, more on the human side versus the technical side. But how difficult or how challenging was it for you to, come in an organization like that and having a different background and being able to say, hey, this is irrelevant of really my background, because I'm producing something that's it's like a business process versus something technical.
Yeah. So I'll answer that in two folds in my own personal, life, how it worked out. So when I was joining consulting, my brother, he has an MBA, and he usually put me down in saying that you really have to get an MBA to crack into consulting. And I was like, I'll try it without an MBA. So I did, but then you had to go at that extra mile. You have to study the case studies. I have friends who have gone to like really reputable MBA schools. I got this book and I prepared for all the case studies. And in my interview, I was able to crack the case and get the job from there on. So in that case, I feel like, I'm happy that you share that, one doesn't have to be really like in that. And we live in such a dynamic world where, college degrees are not as important as maybe 30 years ago, as long as you're willing to learn the craft and, you're really adaptable on how things are changing. But I will also throw a word of caution in terms of you have to do the work. Like you cannot show up in an industry not knowing anything and trying to just have the fluff or the buzzwords, and then it will only keep you alive for a certain bit. So you have to really do the work. For example, when I was working for Hydro One, I had to go back and understanding the grid system. What are the pain points of like switching, and where is the efficiency that like a telecom business loses, and how does the leadership, what are their pain points? So you have to do the work before you show up, because all the fluff and the business words will only last you so long.
No, I completely agree with that. And I even said, even when you get into that leadership role, you have to have an overall understanding of what the team is doing, what the projects are about, etc. But I think some of the expectation for some that I've seen hiring these managers is you are now the subject matter expert in this group and you're leading it. And that becomes very difficult because those managers have a difficult time delegating work, and they have a hard time trusting others with work because they see themselves as the expert and they don't really have that trust with their team.
Yeah, I agree. I think in my opinion, there's very few specific areas where you really need to be like a technical expert. Like if you're working for NASA and like, space industry, then you have to have that expertise. But overall, I think the way business is evolving, the dynamics are the same. How do you do the market entry? How do you sell your product? How do you manage your teams? How do you become into leadership? That is a template that could be applied to any industry, right? You could be in telecom, you will have the same issues. You could be in launching a SaaS platform, and you might have to go through the same issues.
That's right. And this goes back to something you brought up earlier in the conversation with respect to diversity, which I really liked, is the intellectual part.
Right.
Now you have that diversity and different intellect coming into a place with a different background. So I think that's really important as well. And thanks for going through that. I'll leave you alone with the consulting world,
Yeah.
the PVA world, as we did a deep dive into there. It was really interesting for me as I had some questions that I wanted to get your thoughts and pick your brain on. So thank you for answering that. I understand that you do some mentoring activities. Can you kind of walk us through what that looks like and how important is mentoring, and how does mentorship develop your leadership skills?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it comes down to like when I was looking into leadership roles, I've had some great mentors who have given me the stage and the position that I am in right now. And in terms of my mentorship roles, it's more around like getting them ready for the PMP certifications. I have a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn, so I help them in getting their, a study plan, what material they should be going on, and I will conduct interview questions with them. And also now that I've transitioned from Canada to US, I get a lot of requests about like how that journey has been, and which we talked about earlier. And so it's mostly around that, like how do you break into program management without an MBA? How do you get PMP certifications? So a lot of my close friends, and LinkedIn is a great place to mentor as well. I've been part of advisory board for University of Houston for customer experience. So that's where I also help them setting up a curriculum, and I find a lot of students coming into customer experience. So I get a lot of mentorship opportunities there as well.
Awesome. Now, sticking with that topic and subject, and I think this is something that a lot of young people struggle with. How do they go about finding a mentor? How do you identify a mentor? How do you approach someone and say, hey, can you mentor me? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I would say, nowadays it's easier to reach out a person compared to 10 years back, right? Like you have LinkedIn, and I mean, the one thing about LinkedIn is people are responsive as long as you are, the conversation is about you learning as well, and you're also trying to explore the other person, which you do in your podcast. And I think that style of communication is very important, where you're not trying to look for one way, like I want this job, can you please spend 15 minutes with me, right? It never works that way. And the second is like making sure you have your interest areas and passion areas, and then you communicate with the community. Like you go out there, and all my jobs have been like that. I've rarely applied for a job. It's usually, I know someone, or it's through my networks, or, they have seen me work in my consulting days and then they refer me. So it's hardly been like me sitting and sending an application, which I think is, you're as powerful as what your network is nowadays.
That's right.
So I think like having the skill set of not having one-sided conversation, but truly being interested in what other person have to offer, and that will take you a lot further, I think.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that 100%. And refrain yourself from, the first conversation is, here's my resume. Can you give me a job?
Yeah.
That's a big no. And people won't respond to that usually.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Nihanth. I greatly appreciate your time and spending your Saturday here with us. I think you've got a wealth of knowledge and experience that will help others when they listen to this podcast. And if people want to reach out to you, Nihanth, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I would be available on LinkedIn. I think this is, and also I'm available on my email, so which I will pass it on to you, and you can add that into the description.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, Rob, like, thank you for having me, and I'm really inspired by your journey, like how you started this leadership, and I think you're mentoring a lot of young folks, and sometimes, as you were talking about having that mentorship, and it's like following you and having these conversations that you have industry leaders can also help them to connect. And I love how you leave, the connection with the audience. If anyone resonates with whatever the conversation we have, and that is how you reach out and start building the network, right? So great job on you, and I'm glad what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of been my mission now to help out as many people as I can in terms of ensuring that they're successful as leaders. I think that's something we have a gap in not just within North America, I'd say the world. And I want to like ensure that I do whatever I can to leave this place making sure it's better for the better, not for the worse. And we need more kindness, we need more love from leaders, and people should go to work and enjoy what they're doing and be safe, not the other way around where they're coming out with mental health issues and they despise what they're doing. They're getting sick because of it. Those are, that's what I want to change. And I can't do it alone. It's with people like yourself that have accepted to be on these podcasts, to spend your time. That means a lot because you also want to be part of that journey to help people, and that means a lot to me.
Right. That's a beautiful aspiration, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Until next time, lead with purpose and inspire those around you. Take care.
Thank you.